It's the 24th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and the 9/11 families just scored a major victory weeks ago in their litigation against Saudi Arabia. Here to discuss it today is the president of 9/11 Justice and a son of a victim of the 9/11 attacks. Brett Eagleson, thank you for joining us, and we're very happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and we're really grateful that we have an opportunity to share our plight and our story.
Thank you. Well, just to start off, if you can tell our viewers, tell us your father's story and your own journey into activism. We're approaching the quarter-century anniversary of the attacks, and new information, startling information, is still coming out.
Yeah, so my dad was 53 years old. He was a manager for a company called Westfield. Westfield owned and operated malls all over the United States, actually all over the world. And my dad was a regional vice president. So he managed about 10 malls for Westfield Corporation on the East Coast. Silverstein Properties and my dad's employer, Westfield, recently had undertaken a 99-year lease of the World Trade Center site from the Port Authority. So at the time, in 2000 and 2001, there was a subterranean retail space below the two World Trade Center towers. And it was this old kind of dilapidated mall, dimly lit, not very nice to go to. It's probably not a mall that a lot of people would desire to go to. But Westfield, my dad's employer, had a vision. They wanted to make that mall their flagship of the East Coast. So they were going to undergo a tremendous renovation and put a lot of money into it. And they wanted my dad to be the person to lead the project. So normally we live in Connecticut, and he would have been working in Connecticut. His office was in Connecticut. He managed that portfolio from Connecticut. But on a temporary basis, he was to commute into New York City on Monday, and he'd come home on Thursdays. And on Fridays, he would do his normal job, which was management of the portfolio. But Monday through Thursday, he was in Manhattan, and he was overseeing the renovation of the retail space of the World Trade Center. And on that morning, my dad had an office space on the 17th floor. There was 13 other colleagues of his from Westfield that day. And we were made aware of the attacks. Obviously, I think for me personally, it was an announcement during second period in high school. I was 15 years old and in high school at the time. And my older brother, Kyle, had called my father once he was made aware that the World Trade Center had been hit by a terrorist attack. And my dad answered, and he was fine. And this is after the initial impact of both planes. And my brother urged my father to get out of the building. And my dad responded and said that he would. He was just going to help to the extent that he could with the FDNY. My dad was a very attention to detail type of person, and he knew that World Trade Center space. Even though he'd only been working there for a few months, he knew that space like the back of his hand. And it was his goal to go back to the 17th floor, grab a set of portable two-way radios, and he was going to distribute them to the FDNY, because one of the problems that we've learned about from that day was that FDNY was having a hard time communicating with their other FDNY members. So my dad recognized that as a problem and told his colleagues, get out of the building. I'm going to go back to the 17th floor, make sure that there's nobody stuck in a stairwell, that there's potentially a handicapped person. And he was going to grab the radios, make sure the floors were clear. And then his plan was to get out of the building. Well, at some point along that journey, that's when the South Tower fell. And we've never recovered him. You see that people are still being identified today, 24 years later. I think 2 weeks ago, somebody was identified. So there's still some hope there. But we've never recovered him. And, my dad died a hero that day. He gave his life so that potentially another father, a young father, could live to raise their family. And he gave his life in honor of his fellow citizens and his fellow countrymen that day. And I think the hardest part of all of this is that if the U.S. government had only an iota or a shred of the courage that my dad had and the courage that the other heroes of that day had, such as the FDNY, the NYPD, the heroes on Flight 77, that this case, this story would have been resolved 23 years ago, because it's become overabundantly clear that our government knew very early on the connections between the 9/11 hijackers, Al-Qaeda, and the Saudi government. It's been 24 years, and we are now just learning that Saudi Arabia played a dramatic and incredible, a totally incriminating role in the support that it lent to the 9/11 hijackers. And it's just, it sickens me. It is horrific. My brother joined the military after these attacks. My father gave his life, and it's not just about our family. It's not, quite frankly, it's not even about the 3,000 Americans that we had to watch being murdered on live TV. This is about all of America. Our lives changed that day. There's a pre-9/11 world and a post-9/11 world. And we owe it to ourselves as a nation, as a country, to be honest with ourselves. And let's figure out why did this information get buried? Why did we have to obtain information from the British authorities and not our own government? So it's a very difficult time, because I am a patriot. I love my country. I fly an American flag every day at my house, and I make a point to do it. But our government has let us down.
Your father's final moments are absolutely heroic. One of the things that you just said resonated with me. What you were talking about, they're still finding and identifying bodies at the World Trade Center site, and they're also discovering new information in the course of your litigation, all of the work that you've been doing with 9/11 Justice. I want to get into that. I had mentioned earlier there was a federal court ruling in Lower Manhattan, very close to the World Trade Center, where Judge Daniels ruled in your favor to take the case against Saudi Arabia to trial. You wrote this at the time of that ruling. After more than 20 years of roadblocks, a federal judge has ruled that the evidence of Saudi Arabia's role in 9/11 warrants a trial. For the families, this is the most consequential step yet toward accountability and justice. It's been 24 years. Tell me how you were feeling when you learned about that ruling and you read it.
Just such an overwhelming sense of relief. I think relief is the best word, because there was a real chance that the federal judge could have dismissed the lawsuit on jurisdictional grounds. So nothing about the merits, because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia doesn't want to argue the merits, because there is no other side to the evidence we've had. So it's important for the listeners to understand that up until this point, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has simply tried to get this lawsuit against it dismissed 2 times. It's failed both times, but they've argued the constitutionality or the legality of the law. So what they did is they said that the law that we passed in 2016, JASTA, they tried to claim that we didn't rise to the occasion, meaning we didn't produce enough evidence, meaning that this lawsuit shouldn't go forward strictly because JASTA doesn't allow jurisdiction. And why this ruling is so meaningful is because a judge had to evaluate the merits first to determine whether or not JASTA applied. So in determining that, yes, JASTA in fact does apply, the judge had to go through the merits and determine that there is credible evidence that the kingdom as an institution, as a government, employed these agents of its government to assist the hijackers. I think, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have the ruling in front of me, but the judge himself said that it's likely, more likely than not, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia specifically employed its own agents for the purposes of helping the hijackers. And I think that bears repeating. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia employed its agents to help the hijackers. And it is incredible that we've been able to get to this point, and we've had a federal judge say that. Those are not my lawyer's words. Those aren't the family members' words. That is a judge's words, that we've produced overwhelming evidence to demonstrate that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia employed the hijackers, employed its agents to help the hijackers.
So to give a little bit of more legal background onto what you were saying just now for viewers, JASTA is the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. That was the work of political action by the 9/11 families to remove some of the cloak of immunity that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was claiming to even get this lawsuit off the ground, that they had to push beyond that cloak of immunity. It was a years-long fight, finally did it, and the judge required jurisdictional evidence to see if the case could get out that door. And so some 20 years later, evidence emerges. You mentioned the agents of Saudi Arabia. The two people who emerge as key figures in this ruling are Omar al-Bayoumi, who is purportedly an accountant for Saudi Arabia, and Fahad al-Thumairi, who was an imam employed by the Saudi Arabian government. And the judge found that there was more to their roles than the titles would seem to suggest. And I want to ask you about some of the evidence that you've gleaned during the discovery process. They found evidence of Bayoumi having a video touring DC sites with a kind of a cryptic message about some sort of operation. They found a handwritten note from Bayoumi, a drawing of a plane with a mathematical formula of its descent. They found out that Bayoumi had helped 9/11 hijackers, two of them, find housing in Saudi Arabia and got a pay raise after that. When you heard about some of the evidence that your lawyers obtained over the course of discovery, decades into it, what was your reaction?
Well, we always knew as family members that, the mainstream narrative that this country was been led to believe that 19 thugs, for lack of a better term, somehow with no knowledge of English, no idea of Western culture, no money, no idea how to fly a plane. They've never been to the United States. Former FBI agents have said that they wouldn't even be able to get out of the LAX airport because they didn't know the significance or meaning of what an exit sign looked like. So the mainstream narrative that we've all grew up on, right, was that that's how it happened. 19 hijackers banded together and somehow pulled off the most devastating and consequential attack, and they're being directed by Osama bin Laden in a cave 7,000 miles away. And that just never felt right. And it was nearly impossible for them to have done that without a support network. And, FBI and intel agents will tell you that were experts on Al-Qaeda, that Al-Qaeda did nothing without meticulous planning. There was no way that Al-Qaeda was going to leave it up to chance that these 19 hijackers were able to pull it off with zero help from anybody. They always had a support network, and all the roads had always pointed back to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But every time we tried to get close to that, our government protected them. They cut the ties between 9/11 and Saudi Arabia on day 3. And it was when we finally obtained proof, tangible proof, as you've alluded to, video proof. I mean, you can't get better than the proof that we've obtained. We've got them on video. The FBI calls Omar al-Bayoumi a co-optee of Saudi Arabian intelligence, meaning he was working with Saudi intelligence. We've got this man on video casing the U.S. Capitol. He is referring to the inhabitants of that capital as demons of the West. He is referring to a plan. He is filming the exits and the entrances of that building, and he's taking note of where the security guards walk and what times they patrol. And he says, "I will report back to you later, my brothers." He also then pans to the top of the Washington Monument, and he pans over to the Smithsonian. And when you zoom out and you look at the top of the Washington Monument and you align it next to or juxtapose it with the Smithsonian, it eerily creates a runway where if you were to fly your plane between those two landmarks, it would end at the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. So it's all on video. And he did this, the timing of when he did this is very significant because he did it in the summer of 1999, which is when the intel officials say that that's when Al-Qaeda was finalizing where their targets would be. Now, we all now know that the plane that crashed where the heroes took over in that Pennsylvania field, the intended target was the U.S. Capitol. So what this evidence does is it shows that Bayoumi, who the FBI says is a Saudi agent, he demonstrates that he has foreknowledge of the mode of the attack because he has the airplane sketch and he has the algorithm of how to descend the plane into the building. He demonstrates knowledge that these al-Qaeda hijackers were up to no good because in his phone book that the FBI obtained, he lists Midhar and Hazmi's name, the two hijackers who he was helping. He lists their name as their combative al-Qaeda code name, their kunya. So he refers to them. So he knows that these two individuals he's talking to, he knows they're al-Qaeda. So for the longest time, Saudi Arabia had tried to say, "Oh, Bayoumi, this was a chance meeting between him and the hijackers. All of this stuff is one big, massive coincidence." We've been able to blow that out of the water, and the judge agreed and says there was never these were no chance meetings between Bayoumi, the Saudi agent, the Saudi intel agent, and Hazmi and Midhar, and that's really some of the most damning and tangible. I mean, I can go on and on and on about all the other evidence, but that's probably the most dramatic and most visible evidence is that you have a Saudi intelligence agent on camera filming the U.S. Capitol. He's got an airplane sketch. He's got an algorithm of how to fly that plane. And lest I forget, he also has on camera, again, I have no idea why he would film any of this, but he has on camera again a welcome party in which he hosted the hijackers at his home.
And they can be seen on camera at that party, correct?
That's right. That's right. And Saudi Arabia has tried to say for years that, the 9/11 Commission investigated us and they exonerated us. And they've tried to argue these senseless arguments. They don't want to argue the merits of the case. And I should say that the 9/11 Commission never had the benefit of this evidence. It was only the 9/11 families that obtained this evidence recently through our discovery in court. The U.S. government didn't give it to us. The U.S. government buried it. We went to the British government, and it was the British government that gave us this evidence. So the 9/11 Commission never saw, for example, that Omar al-Bayoumi, the Saudi intelligence agent, they never knew that he had a sketch of an airplane with an algorithm of how to fly a plane into a building or a target. They never knew that he was referring to senators and U.S. members of Congress as the demons of the West. They never knew that he was welcoming the hijackers into his home. They hadn't seen any of that. So that's the most incredible part of all this story, is that all of this was kept from the American public for 24 years.
Are you surprised that it's taken nearly a quarter of a century to get details like that to light?
I mean, nothing surprises me anymore. We've gone from administration to administration, and for some strange reason, and I've never heard a really good answer, I've never heard a credible answer, for some strange reason, the former presidents have always sided with the kingdom over the American victims of terror. President Obama, for example, vetoed our law JASTA. So that's that law that you were referring to earlier, which allowed us to get to this point. He vetoed it. And Congress delivered to President Obama his one and only veto override of his entire 8 years. It was a historic veto override. It was 97 senators to 1 voted in favor to override the veto because it was the will of Congress to allow us to have our day in court. President Trump met with me and other family members. We brought the former FBI agents with us, and we pleaded and begged him for help. Within 24 hours of that meeting, he invoked what's known as the state secrets privilege on the 9/11 families, shielding the most damning evidence against Saudi Arabia from the public light. So after seeing all that, it doesn't surprise me that it's taken so long, but I think that the overarching and the overwhelming theme, the overpowering theme of all of this is that none of us are going away. In fact, I'm teaching my children about this. I'm second generation. I was a child. I was 15 years old on 9/11. I didn't really get started in this fight until 2016. But we have truth on our side. We have justice on our side. We have the lives of our loved ones on our side. And none of us are ever going to give up. And we've made tremendous progress in all of this. So it's taken a while, but we cannot be deterred. And we feels as if we just got a shot in the arm, an energy shot in the arm with this Daniels decision, because justice is every human's right. And it's taken us this long, but we're finally on a path to having our day in court and having justice.
As you mentioned, your recent court victory was made possible by the political action of people like you, groups like yours. What has been the reaction to this ruling on Capitol Hill? Have you noticed anything? Are people, are Congress members coming to your attention now and giving you the support now that they see what evidence has emerged?
Well, I wish we would see more action. I have to give a special shout out to my senator from my home state of Senator Blumenthal. Him and I have become close personal friends throughout the past 10 years that we've been fighting together. And he led the efforts to pass the law, JASTA. And he's solicited many of his colleagues to join in our fight. He's a lone standout. Senator Cornyn from Texas is a Republican on the other side of the aisle that Senator Blumenthal works with on these issues. So it's a bipartisan issue. We haven't even really had much time yet to brief them on this decision. As you know, this is a very relatively new decision. It's less than 2 weeks old, but we hope to set up some meetings with members of Congress and educate them, because this is a extremely complex story. It has taken 24 years for us to even get to this point. But back to your original question, what's there been reaction? So far, their public reaction has been muted. In fact, the House of Commons in Parliament on Monday was making more of an issue out of this than the U.S. Senate or the U.S. Congress. And they had an urgent session in the House of Commons, and a member of Parliament stood up. And he asked the secretary, I think it's of their version of Homeland Security, demanding that given these new revelations, that the British government should open up a new investigation into 9/11, because all this information, even over in the United Kingdom, was buried. So Parliament in the UK, to their credit, has made more noise so far. But if we do our job right, and if things go our way, we're going to be damn sure that the United States Congress starts putting more pressure on the administrative branch, on the executive branch of our government, and putting more pressure on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to come clean. Be honest with yourself. Our government should be honest with its own citizens, and Saudi Arabia ought to be honest with itself. And our government, our executive branch of government owes these families an explanation. What happened to this evidence? What was the chain of custody? And their silence has been deafening. We have not heard anything from the Trump administration since this ruling.
What's your message to the Trump administration and to Congress?
Stand with the families. Stand with Americans. The Trump administration campaigned on this promise of putting America first, right? Make America great again. It should be America first, and we're going to have tariffs, and we're going to be an isolationist country, and we want to focus on Americans. So where are you? Where have you been? The president has been cutting golf deals with Live Golf in Saudi Arabia. His son-in-law has taken a $2 billion cash infusion from the Saudi Public Investment Fund. Now, we would expect that the White House would at least have some comment on what's been happening to us, and some comment on where this evidence was and why it was that way. The president campaigned on transparency and making America great again. These two issues are red meat for his administration. In fact, it was Bob Mueller, that was the FBI director at the time, that led to this evidence being buried. So we have a hard time figuring out why the White House has been quiet. We want Congress to take our side. We want to stand together with Congress and have accountability from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And that doesn't mean that we should cut ties with the Saudi government. I am rational enough to know, and sober enough to know, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a tremendous amount of influence in Washington, D.C. They buy hundreds of billions of dollars of our weapons. They stabilize world oil markets. They hold hundreds of billions of dollars of treasury securities. So our government, in a way, unfortunately or not, is tied to the kingdom. And we're certainly not advocating more war. We're certainly not advocating more intervention. What we want closure. We want the kingdom to settle the lawsuit. We want the kingdom to admit accountability. And then a lot of people will say, well, settle the lawsuit. Doesn't that just mean money? Unfortunately, that's the only path of recourse that these families have, because our government failed to prosecute Omar al-Bayoumi and Fahad al-Thumari. They didn't prosecute anybody. So the civil path is the only path that our families have in terms of justice. So Saudi Arabia admitting that they were culpable would go a long way to bringing closure for our community.
Thank you so much, Brett, for your time. I just have one more question. How do you plan to spend the 9/11 commemoration this year?
So I like to spend it with my family. As I've said before, we are from Connecticut. I have gone to the ceremony in New York City. However, it's very hectic there. It's chaotic. It's often very noisy, and there's a lot of buzz and things of that nature. And my family and I just like to enjoy it quietly and privately in our small town at our local firehouse, where they have a beautiful ceremony with bagpipes and moments of silence and stories from that day. So I intend to be home in rural Connecticut with my family and hopefully have a relaxing, peaceful day.
Thank you so much, Brett, for your time and for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. To learn more about this story and the other stories that we cover, visit www.allrisenews.com and subscribe. That's www.allrisenews.com. And to see more videos like this on Legal AF, hit subscribe now.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.